Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? Today is June 17th, 2021, one day before my mom's birthday, so I wanted to start out by saying happy birthday, Mom, tomorrow, June the 18th. Today, we are back with another episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Episode number 16 is here. Hard to believe that the show has come this far, but I'm happy to say that it has made it this far. And I am not anxious, but I am intrigued with the direction that the show can go in the future, and I hope to take it a lot farther, and I hope to explore every possible avenue that I can in the process. So today's topic for episode 16 is Led Zeppelin's sophomore effort, Led Zeppelin 2, released in 1969. It is one of their finest albums and one of rock and roll's finest albums. So we're going to explore into the background of the album, break it down track by track as we usually do, and wrap things up with my final thoughts, and eventually at the end, give it a score out of 10. So Led Zeppelin is one of rock's most famous acts of all time, no question about that. If you are interested in my thoughts on the first Led Zeppelin album titled Led Zeppelin, you can go back all the way back to the first episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, released back in January of this year, to hear my thoughts on that album. But today, roughly 6 months later, we are covering the second album, Led Zeppelin 2. So, like I said, it was released in 1969, October of 69, October 22nd in the United States, and October 31st in the United Kingdom. It would go on to go 12 times platinum here in the United States, and peaking at number 1 on the Billboard charts. At this time in Zeppelin's career, obviously it is only their second album, so they have not risen to the fame and the height that they will eventually reach. So this is still part of Zeppelin's coming out party. After Led Zeppelin 1, the band does intense touring, and that is where a lot of this album is recorded on the road. It's recorded in many different studios across different continents even. Some recorded in Europe, some recorded in North America. So kind of during a hectic time period in Zeppelin's career. But the album definitely would go on to be very successful. As I mentioned, it reached number 1 on the Billboard charts, knocking Abbey Road from that number 1 position. So if you think about who kind of the number 1 band is at the time, the 60s, obviously the Beatles are at the top there. And quite literally, into the 70s, we see Led Zeppelin knock them off. Abbey Road, which is a fantastic album, and we will definitely have to dedicate an episode to that album down the line. But we see kind of a transition of who's kind of at the top of the rock game from the Beatles to Led Zeppelin, with Led Zeppelin 2 knocking Abbey Road from the number 1 chart position. So if we talk about the tone and the feel that the album presents overall, it has a blues feel, but it's a harder rock sound as well, so it's a fusion of blues rock here that's very prominent in Zeppelin's roots. A lot of blues covers were featured on their first album, and even in the second album, a lot of blues-inspired music, which eventually does get them in some legal trouble, which we will touch on today. But the blues rock combination is something that will be mentioned frequently throughout this podcast, as it is pretty common in their music, especially on this second album. So as I mentioned, this is one of the greatest albums of all time, and it has been thoroughly praised that way through many different faces and people in the world of rock and roll. As I also mentioned, the album, when recording, was very sporadic, recorded in the United States, in England, in Canada even, and the quality of these studios varied from place to place. In a book on Led Zeppelin I had read before recording this episode, it had mentioned a studio in Vancouver that had nothing, that didn't even have proper headphone equipment to record with. So definitely lacking in proper equipment, but the band kind of made the best of their situation. Album was recorded between April and August of 1969, with the official release coming later in October of 1969. But a lot of different hurdles to jump over in the recording process, which sort of leads to the sound, maybe creating a rougher sound and maybe just kind of creating less intricate and less complex song material, but still churning out one of rock's greatest albums and one of their best albums in their entire catalog. So the sales upon the release in the fall of 1969 are impressive. Zeppelin, as I said, still trying to make a name for themselves, and this album definitely helps to launch them into that scene, with many classic songs and even certain songs charting in the singles charts, those two tracks being Whole Lotta Love and Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman. Those both appeared in the Billboard charts. So there was definitely commercial success when the album was first released. However, critical reaction was different from commercial reaction. There was complaints of all the songs sort of blending together and the album sounding like one big long song. But obviously, these criticisms waned over time, and Led Zeppelin II would go on to surpass these criticisms, and ranking 123rd on Rolling Stone's Top 500 Albums of All Time list, which was released, or should I say revised, in 2020. Rolling Stone has done a Top 500 Albums list twice now. They did an original one in 2003, in which Led Zeppelin II placed 75th, and then the 2020 we'll call it the remastered version of the Top 500 Albums from Rolling Stone, Zeppelin II was knocked down a few pegs to 123, but still in the top 500 nonetheless. At this time, if you can hear my dogs barking, I do apologize from that. My brother has just returned home from work, but we're not going to let that stop the show here. The show must go on, and we're going to keep on trekking. So that's pretty much the background on Led Zeppelin II, a band who would go on to be one of rock's greatest. Their career is still budding, and they're trying their best to make a name for themselves. Overall, as I said, a blues rock sound here, and this album is regarded as one of Zeppelin's heaviest albums in their catalog. And obviously, heavy metal is not really a thing yet in 1969. Black Sabbath releasing their debut album, which we talked about. What episode was that in? Give me 2 seconds here while I pull up what episode that was. But we did an episode on Black Sabbath's debut album. My friend John stopped by for that one. That was in episode number 4. So that was back on February 18th. So February 13th, 1970, Black Sabbath's debut album was released. And that's kind of the roots of heavy metal. But Led Zeppelin II certainly plays a role in the heavier sounds in music and the evolution of rock and roll into what does become modern-day metal. So, without further ado, let's get into the track-by-track breakdown. So the album opens up with Whole Lotta Love. This song is a classic rock radio staple to this day. It is one that most rock fans have definitely heard. And if you haven't heard the whole song, you definitely know that iconic riff. Ba-doom, ba-doom, bum, ba-ba-bum, 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 ba-doom, ba-doom, bum. And then the song just progresses from there with Robert Plant's high-quality vocals guiding us through, Bonham on the drum set, and John Paul Jones on the bass. So that is the cast of Led Zeppelin: Robert Plant, Jimmy Page on the guitar, John Bonham behind the kit, and John Paul Jones on the bass, as well as playing some keys occasionally on certain tracks. So this was Zeppelin's first hit in the United States. and really one of their few hit singles. Zeppelin was not a band that was known for making big-time singles. Their albums were more large in presence and kind of more known for their albums than single one-off songs. But Whole Lotta Love was the first hit in the United States. VH1 named the song number 3 on the greatest hard rock songs of all time list that they made, and I believe that was back in 2009. But the song clearly has high critical acclaim as well as commercial acclaim over time. So, once again, it's a blues rock track centered around the theme of love and just kind of sex. That becomes abundantly clear when we have the breakdown section in the middle. And if you've heard the song, you definitely know what I'm talking about. We have Robert Plant sort of going off on these sexual moaning tangents, while we have Jimmy Page playing a theremin that's tuned down to make, deeper, more quote-unquote evil or darker sounding noises, with John Bonham playing some bongos. And it's an interesting section, but we've got to get through some of the meat and potatoes of the song first. But that riff kind of carries us through the first portion of the song, and Robert's kind of singing, it's a blues lyrics as far as I'm concerned, about love and, I want a whole lot of love. And Jimmy Page using kind of a unique slide to kind of create that, almost sounding like a plane landing or whatnot on his guitar. So we get to I'll call it the sexual breakdown that Robert Plant leads us on. And at the time of this release, we're talking 1969, so a different time culturally speaking. Certain radio stations had edited that out, so there are different edited versions of Whole Lotta Love out there. But this one, the version that you can hear on many streaming services, and you can definitely find the full version today, is the most common version, and that does have the sexual breakdown still included from Mr. Robert Plant. But then John Bonham carries us out of that with a 16th note pattern. And then Jimmy Page plays a fantastic solo. This is one of his finest solos on the album. But not my favorite solo from him on this album. We'll touch on that a little later in the show. But this, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, there were certain songs that got Zeppelin in some legal trouble, and Whole Lotta Love is no exception. So there was some lyrical similarity between a song entitled You Need Love, which was a song written by Willie Dixon. So Dixon received credit following a 1985 lawsuit, which I believe Zeppelin settled outside of court. They settled with Willie Dixon's recording label. They paid the label an unknown sum of money, and Willie Dixon was paid from the label under $50,000. And if you think about how many plays and how many streams that Whole Lotta Love gets, one could argue at the time in 1985, Willie Dixon may have been screwed. This is the most popular song on the album. It has millions of plays across Spotify. There are different versions, from remastered versions to re-released versions, but millions upon millions upon millions of plays. If we look at Led Zeppelin's top 5, it ranks number 3 on the list with over 352 million plays, which is quite a bit. It's a fantastic song. It's one of Zeppelin's finest. It's one of their most well-known. It peaked at number 4 on the U.S. Billboard charts, and it's the band's only top 10 single in the United States. And it's a fantastic song with a fantastic guitar playing, and as a guitar player myself, one that I thoroughly enjoy listening to, and I think most guitar players can appreciate the greatness of Jimmy Page on this track. So we move on now to another song that really oozes the blues here. That is What Is and What Should Never Be. This is a underrated track if I've ever heard one. It has its softer moments, but it picks up into the heavier moments. John Bonham kind of guides us through those. With the verses, he's just kind of hanging out on the ride. And then when we get to the chorus, his presence is heard. He's known for being a very loud drum set player, so he makes his presence heard when he needs to be heard. The guitar parts as well, there are transitions between acoustic guitar and electric guitar phrases, which also help add to the heavier sections versus the softer sections where Robert is kind of singing his lyrics and, spreading his poetry, so to speak. I think John Paul Jones does a fantastic job on the bass line here, underneath everything that's going on. I think he's a very talented player, and I think what he's doing in a lot of these songs is oftentimes overlooked, so I want to give credit to Jonesy where credit is due. The solo on this track is beautiful. It's very kind of, it's not in your face like A Whole Lot of Love or other solos on this album. It's sort of soft and floating and kind of uplifting at parts, musically speaking, and it's almost feels like musically the notes are just floating and it's just like on a cloud, and I just love what Jimmy Page does here. So when we turn to what Robert Plant is doing, what he is singing about, this is about Robert Plant's wife, his wife's sister. So hence the title, What Is and What Should Never Be. So perhaps Robert had some feelings for his wife's sister that he aired out on this track. And apparently Robert did date his wife's sister before marrying her. So there is a connection there. It's an interesting one. It's one of my favorites. And as I said, it's an underrated tune overall and an interesting second track on the album. But I like Robert's vocals here. I think it's a great start to the album, and I think it's a good flow between the two. And the conclusion to this track, things kind of pick up, and we do get a gong hit. Oftentimes, you see John Bonham in concert, and he's got this big gong behind him, and you think, what is this man doing with the gong? And what is and what should never be? Man hits the gong towards the end, kind of carries us to the outro, if you will. Yeah. But it's a fantastic song. But moving on now to track number 3, it is the Lemon Song. Now you might be thinking, the Lemon Song, what the hell is that talking about? And we kind of learn later in the lyrics what exactly a lemon is referring to. I will give you a hint, it is sexual, folks. So no surprise there. Big time rock stars writing about sexual lyrical material. Big shock. So once again, this kind of reflects a heavy blues sort of feel. The guitar is more aggressive than it would be for other music at this time. So this originated as a live track entitled Killen Floor that the band would play in 1968 and 1969. Killen Floor was a Howlin' Wolf track, and once again, a lawsuit was brought forth towards the band in 1972, and it was settled outside of court, and on later releases, Howlin' Wolf did receive his credit. And yeah, so the song, we're talking about squeezing lemons, right? Until I fall right out of bed. Squeeze my lemon till the juice runs down my leg. You don't have to be some kind of scholar to know what Robert Plant is singing about there. But there seems to be some kind of regret, maybe. I should have quit you a long time ago. I should have listened, baby, to my second mind. So kind of blues lyrics singing about heartache and pain, and a lot of repetition in those lyrics, too, because first verse, I should have quit you a long time ago. Oh, yeah, long time ago. And then kind of same thing in the second verse. I should have listened, baby, to my second mind. And he repeats the same phrase again. So that idea of repetition is something we see here. And then we kind of, sort of as what is and what should never be, we kind of have things pick up in terms of tempo. I like the chords that Jimmy Page is playing towards the end. And then things kind of fade out towards the end. This is another one where Jimmy's solo, it's got a great blues feel. I like the tone of his guitar here. It definitely shows Zeppelin showing off their blues roots on the Lemon Song. And Killen Floor, they take kind of a blues standard and they add their own flavor to it. So something Zeppelin is definitely known for, something they've even been criticized for throughout their career. But what can I say? I love it, and it's good music, so how can you hate that much? So we move now to track number 4, entitled Thank You. Now, get your tissues out, because this is the ballad, this is the tearjerker, this is the one that, the heartfelt song, and unlike the second song, which was supposedly written to Robert Plant's wife's sister, this one is written from Mr. Robert Plant to his lovely wife, Maureen. And this is one of the first tracks that Robert Plant wrote entirely on his own. A lot of the tracks there had been obviously inspired by old blues standards or old blues songs. And this was one where he wrote entirely all the lyrics on his own, which Jimmy Page was very relieved to see, because Jimmy himself was not confident in his lyrical ability. And I think it's great that, if you're a lead singer of a band, you want to be able to sing, you want to be able to be, attached to what you're singing. So I think if you can have as close of a relationship to the lyrics as possible, I think that's an overall win in the end. John Paul Jones, here, as I mentioned, he is the bass player, but he also played the keys on several tracks where he was needed. And Thank You is one of those tracks where he pulls out the organ and he gets to work. Jimmy Page here is on the acoustic guitar and even plays a rare acoustic guitar solo. So that is something nice. The song is just a soft, beautiful song. It might be criticized by some Led Zeppelin fans who are into more of the heavy stuff, the more guitar-driven tracks, but I think it's a beautiful song. And I really love the message and the theme. And, as the lyrics say, if the sun refused to shine, I would still be loving you. And it's just a simple love song. And overall, just one, as the track suggests, the title suggests, thank you. He's thankful for the love he's got. And the organ makes an interesting flair, something you wouldn't expect to see here on an album that's known for being, harder rock. But I think it fits, and while it doesn't sound like anything else on the album, it's unique, and it's not overdoing it, and I think it belongs perfectly. And I have no problem with the track whatsoever. So if you're listening to this on a vinyl, this is where we would flip sides, and this is where things would end, and you would flip it over to track number 5. Now, if you're listening to a CD, obviously goes straight through, same with streaming service, but as a big vinyl guy, I kind of know this is where the side flips. Which is interesting to note because the second side starts with a track entitled Heartbreaker. And this is another song that is fairly heavier than the rest. And when we look at side 1, that starts with Whole Lotta Love, which is another track that is fairly heavier than the rest. So I don't know if that was purposefully done, where they started both sides with their heaviest tracks on the album. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but I think it is kind of a nice little coincidence if it's not intentional, and something that's interesting to point out. So this one is a heavy blues riff, another iconic riff that most guitar players and honestly just rock fans in general should know. And once again, blues is reflected in the lyrics as well, speaking on heartbreak, and the woman that our narrator is with here calls out another guy's name when he's trying to make love to you, and that's the big kind of line that is often stuck in my head when I think about this song. And that line kind of leads us into what I believe is the finest solo on this track, and is one of my favorite Jimmy Page solos. My friend and I have often thought about, what is our favorite Led Zeppelin solo? And this one was always in my mind for me. I just love the hammer-ons and the pull-offs and everything he's doing, and it's honestly kind of revolutionary for guitar playing. I mean, the late great Eddie Van Halen had cited this solo as being one that had inspired him a lot, and Eddie was incredibly influential as a guitar player, and you think about everything he inspired, and it all circles back to Jimmy Page. So Jimmy Page is an incredibly influential guitarist in terms of just how much his music impacted other great guitarists. It's incredibly impressive, and it's one of my favorite Jimmy Page solos. The track has a large sound, and it shows the band just flexing their muscles. They can make heavy music, and it's an interesting contrast when you think about the track before. It's a softer track with, more love-based lyrics, and this one's, oh my god, I'm getting my heart broken, and here's a fucking flamin' solo. It's great to hear. It's one of their best. If I were making a best of playlist where I could only include so many songs from a certain album, this would definitely make the cut. I would probably include Whole Lotta Love, Heartbreaker, and Ramble On as my 3 from this album, if I could get 3 from each album, which is an interesting topic and maybe something I could address in a later podcast. But Heartbreaker is one of the top 3 tracks on this album for sure, and I believe it's one of their top 10. It's got to be top 10 on Spotify. I want to get you the data on that, so let me see here. According to Spotify, I'm not looking at Whole Lotta Love. Heartbreaker is not top 10. That's surprising me. Dire Maker apparently has more plays than Heartbreaker. That's a damn shame. But the song is fantastic and is one of their finest and should be known by all rock fans. Whether you like Zeppelin or not, you have to give Heartbreaker a listen. I don't make the rules, but that's how it is. The song then transitions pretty flawlessly into Living Loving Maid. She's Just a Woman. This is the shortest track on the album. It's less than 3 minutes long. It's a pretty straightforward rock song. The lyrics, they can be kind of ambiguous. Not too ambiguous. I guess they're just kind of about an older woman who's kind of holding on to her youth. And money's involved in the lyrics. Let me just pull up the lyrics here because I don't want to be inaccurate with what I'm saying here. So we have this character here who is just a woman, I think that's what the lyrics are talking about. Yeah, just kind of an older woman who's trying to hang on to her youth and trying to maybe not act her age and just trying to be young. I could be totally off on that. I read that in a book, so that's not the 100% truth, and that's the beautiful thing about music. The lyrical interpretation is entirely up to you, and interpreting lyrics and trying to find the meaning in songs isn't something that I always do, so my interpretations might sometimes be off. And this is one where I kind of just try to focus on the music more. Another great riff, and honestly, if you're a beginning guitar player, it's fairly simple. That it's a great one that you could learn. And now, while I do praise the song, Jimmy Page it's pretty famously known that he has disliked the song, hence why it was never played live. I don't blame him for disliking this one. It's not overly impressive. It's just kind of, it is what it is. I'm not sure why he dislikes it so. Maybe because of the length. Maybe things were cut down. Maybe the lyrical content. Who knows? But it did chart in the U.S. I believe charting at number 65 is where it peaked. But I enjoy the song. It's not, like I said, it's not one of my favorites. But I have no problem listening to it. And it's short enough that you can get through it without too much of a headache. But we move on now. What track number are we on? We're on 7, right? Yes. So this is track 7. My favorite track on the whole album. Might even be my favorite Led Zeppelin song. I'm not sure, but that is Ramble On. It's a beautiful song. I love the acoustic sound, but it still is heavy. It's a perfect blend of the softer side of Zeppelin with the heavier side of Zeppelin, and I love the guitar sound in both the little kind of interlude parts, both the kind of quote-unquote solos. The lyrics are based off The Lord of the Rings. Robert Plant was a big fan of those, and they had inspired several Led Zeppelin songs. It was another one that had not been played live until Celebration Day, which occurred in 2007, live at O2 Arena with John Bonham's son behind the drum set. But Jimmy Page he didn't want to mess up the acoustic kind of sound, bringing out an acoustic guitar live. So that's why Ramble On was never performed live. But I love the feel of this song. I love how every different section in the band contributes something different. Robert's vocals kind of shriek above the rest. John Bonham's drums guide the flow of the song. John Paul Jones's bass fill gaps within the song. And Jimmy Page's guitar They start us off with a nice, beautiful E chord, and as a guitar player myself, that is one of my favorite songs to play on the guitar, so maybe that is why it is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs. I love what everybody contributes to it, and the band really, they each are incredibly talented, and they all come together to make this fantastic song. So Ramble On is a top-notch song for me, and is my favorite track on the album. So we move on now to track number 8, and that is Moby Dick. This is a song that is fantastic. John Bonham, enough said, He is a man that needs little introduction. A man that played tambourine on the Battle of Evermore. He is, of course, John Henry Bonham. This song has been described as a love letter to John Bonham. It's not entirely John Bonham. There is a fun little drop D riff section that's opened. It's basically just a 12-bar blues, and then drum solo, and then it finishes with the same 12-bar blues pattern. And this is often played live, with the drum solo going at least 20 minutes in length. The live recordings sometimes even over 30 minutes in length just for one song. It's pretty awesome. The recording that you would hear on the album was actually edited and clipped together with Jimmy Page recording John Bonham pretty much just fucking around in the studio at different studios that they had recorded this album in, and just kind of mashing it together. Concerning the title, Moby Dick, I don't know where that came from, but it stands out for sure. Perhaps Bonham was a fan of the novel or something like that, but Bonham is one of the best drummers of all time, and actually episode number 19, which is coming up here in 2 to 3 weeks, is going to cover some of the best drummers in rock and metal history. So John Bonham's name will definitely be discussed in that conversation. Moby Dick, like I said, it's a love letter to John Bonham. It's a perfect showcase of his skill. And he's incredibly talented. And finding out that it was edited and strung together kind of takes it away, but then you think he did it live, so it's not like he couldn't do it all in the same go. So it's a fun track to listen to, and an interesting one to play for someone who's not really familiar with Bonham or drum set players, and it kind of blows some people's minds at first. But John Bonham, over the top. Enough said. We move on now to track number 9, Bring It On Home, and this is where the album brings it on home. This is the finale to the album. I love the blues kind of riff here. Baby. Robert Plant, once again, this is a blues track. It's blues feels oozing all over the place. Led Zeppelin has a live album called How the West Was Won, and the performance of Bring It On Home on there is one of my favorites. This is kind of a perfect way to end the album, because it takes the themes of the album, just kind of the musical themes, so to speak, the combination of blues and heavier, harder rock sounds, and this song showcases that once again perfectly. So there's the progression. We've got the soft blues opening with Robert Plant on the harmonica, and boy, do I love me some harmonica on tracks. And then we get the heavier sound, which has an underrated riff in my opinion. Ba-na-na-na-now, wah-na-na-na-now, ba-na-na-na-now, wah-na-na-bum-bum. And then we take off. Robert's singing about bringing it on home, his blues kind of themes and relationships and women and all this and that, and classic stuff that they sing about constantly. It's found not only in Zeppelin's music, but old rock music, old blues music. So those are pretty common lyrical themes. And once again, more legal trouble for Zeppelin here. Willie Dixon had written the intro and outro. The suit was settled once again outside of court for an undisclosed sum. It's a great closing to the album. And it, like I said, it defines Zeppelin's blues rock fusion that they go after on this album, and it's a wonderful conclusion. So if I had to evaluate the album in full, it's a terrific album. It's one of their best, and the combination of blues and hard rock have an incredible impact on the entire genre of rock music down the line. It's one of their finest albums. There's a big debate, is this the best album, or is Zeppelin's 4th album the best album in their catalog? I am of the latter persuasion. I prefer Zeppelin 4 a tad, but do not get it twisted as me downplaying Zeppelin 2. I respect and I definitely appreciate everything that this album has done for rock music and not everything that's done for me, but just the quality of these tracks. It's really that simple. So, if I had to score it out of 10, I would give it, I'm not going to give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I think because the reason I wouldn't give it a perfect score, despite my liking every song, I think some of the songs aren't weak, but I think there's better stuff, and maybe the lack of originality, which is evidenced in the amount of lawsuits that the band faced throughout the production, or not in the production, but the post-release of these albums, the amount of times they had to settle because of their quote-unquote, stealing of music or whatever like that. But if I had to score the album, I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. Again, one of Zeppelin's finest, and an album that I love to listen to every once and again. So that was episode 16 on Led Zeppelin 2 from the almighty Led Zeppelin, released in 1969. That will be, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun making it, a lot of fun doing the research. Episode 17 upcoming, I'm going to tackle Greta Van Fleet's Battle at the Garden's Gate, released this past April in 2021, part of the rock revival. I'm happy to touch on this album, and my brother Ian is going to be making his Owen's Rock and Metal podcast debut. We're going to get together and chit-chat about Greta. We're both pretty big Greta fans, and if you're unfamiliar with Greta, or if you've heard bad things about Greta, I would really encourage you to listen to their album, and listen to the music. Try to listen to it with an open mind, and if you're still not convinced, maybe come back, listen to the podcast, and maybe I can convince some of you Greta haters that they are not just a Zeppelin copy, and that they are a totally valid act, and they are part of this rock revival, and they deserve their place in music today. But that's all going to come in episode 17, and this was episode 16 today. So I hope you guys enjoyed what you heard here today, and as always, never stop rockin'.